Hi, I'm Jim Dudlesek, Communications Director for the National Grocers Association. Bill Marler is the most prominent foodborne illness lawyer in America and a major force in food policy in the United States and around the world. He's going to share his expertise and insights as a featured speaker at the National Grocers Association's Executive Conference and Public Policy Summit, October 24th to 26th in Washington, D.C. Today, as a preview of that highly anticipated presentation, Mr. Marler will chat with NGA President and CEO Greg Ferrara about some of the ideas he plans to share with independent grocery executives at the summit. Mr. Marler's pioneering casework representing plaintiffs impacted by contaminated food products has influenced food companies to do a better job at enacting food safety procedures and communicating recalls to consumers. His practice, Marler Clark, the food safety law firm, has represented thousands of individuals in tainted product claims against food companies dating back to 1993, when he represented the most seriously injured survivor of the historic Jack in the Box E. coli outbreak. And now I'll turn things over to Greg to start our discussion.
Well, good afternoon, Bill. It's great to be with you today, and we're really excited to have you speak to our attendees this fall at the NGA Executive Conference and Public Policy Summit here in Washington, D.C. Bill, it's been an interesting past few years, particularly in the grocery industry. Certainly managing through COVID and the supply chain challenges, and then the labor challenges, and everything else that has come about. And we've had a number of, high-profile food recall, food safety issues. The most recent that for our industry is really the infant formula and the challenges that has produced. And, Bill, that's really kind of raised the profile of the federal food safety agencies, particularly, the FDA. Sometimes the joke here in Washington is, although the first letter of FDA stands for food, we don't always get the attention that it probably should. So, kind of what are your thoughts in terms of, what should we really be doing in terms of federal agencies, and how should those maybe be structured to best affect food safety regulations here in the U.S.?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one I've been pondering for probably 30 years. But let me first take one thing about the pandemic that I think the whole public really got to understand is how vital grocery stores are. I mean, if there was one thing during the pandemic that I think everyone agreed on is that grocery store workers and grocery stores were really sort of the front line of all of this. And I think people, and certainly I have, gained a much broader and deeper respect for what the industry does. And so my hat's off to you guys for that. I've always had kind of a love-hate relationship with the FDA. But if you think about the scope of what they do, 80% plus of the food supply, they have a fraction of the inspector corps that FSIS has. I mean, and there are many times in many of the big outbreaks that I've been involved in over the years where an FDA inspector hadn't been in a plant, for 3, 4, 5 years. And then during the pandemic, it was a huge challenge of getting people, there. It's going to be interesting to see what the commissioner's group is going to be doing, over the sort of the relook at how food is done at the FDA. And I'm really going to be excited. I think all of us need to engage in that, because having a strong regulatory body that deals with food and food safety is going to be really beneficial to consumers, to retailers, and to the manufacturers.
I tell people all the time, Bill, food safety is pretty simple, I think, for grocers or restaurateurs, whoever else. If consumers don't have confidence in the food you are selling, they're not going to shop with you. You're probably going to be out of business. Right. And think that if you're sloppy, if you have major outbreak, you do something. I mean, your brand could be destroyed. God forbid you make people sick or worse. Right. it's something to be taken seriously. And I think you're right. We've got to find a way to get our regulatory agencies in this place where they're being proactive, they're being engaged, but they're also, I think we got to have common sense as well. And
absolutely.
And I think about the regulatory side and who our members are and the folks have to implement this and doing it in a way that's risk-based and ensures that we're not making a system so complex that only the largest of the large in this country can comply with it because they have departments to be able to do this, and everyone else falls through the crack. Then that's not effective either.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you. I mean, especially in a retail grocery store setting, when you're not manufacturing food, when you don't have a deli or that sort of thing. I mean, you rely a lot on both the FDA and third-party auditors to make sure the product that's coming in to your grocery store that you're selling to the public is safe. Because I think you're absolutely right. A lot of times the public doesn't when something goes sideways, product is contaminated, product gets recalled, they're not necessarily paying attention to the farm where the product was grown. They're paying attention to where I bought it from. Yeah. And so I mean, I think there's a bit of, I think, as you said, brand awareness. There's some self-preservation that I think helps, focus, the grocery stores and retail outlets' attention on the need for a strong but smart regulatory body. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question for you, Bill. What do you believe really have been the reasons behind some of the foodborne illness that we've seen, particularly recently, the recalls and the outbreaks? What is from your take and your perspective, what are you seeing? What do you think's driving this?
So I teach a class, a seminar class with Frank Yanis at Michigan State University. Yeah. And I've known Frank for a long time. We call each other frenemies. I've known him when he was at Disney and Walmart, and now at the FDA, and I have just tons of respect for the guy. But Frank and I wind up talking a lot about food safety culture, and he's got his own perspective on it. But my perspective on it, and to answer your question directly, there has not been one outbreak that I've been involved in the last 30 years that there weren't warning signs and opportunities before the outbreak happened to have sort of steered the bus away from the cliff before it careened off. And I think that, in a broad way, and again, you said it, it was, food safety is kind of simple, but really what it is creating an environment that people can pay attention or are, encouraged to pay attention to those warning signs, and they're, whether it was Jack in the Box 30 years ago, getting warnings that, Washington State had increased cook times to 155, but the rest of the country was 140. Why did they pay attention to that but not do anything? What was their thought process? And the same thing, I could give you example after example, up to the infant formula recall. I mean, if you look at those inspection reports, you're like, what were they thinking? And so I think that it's creating the environment that allows that sort of communication, in the food safety space to solve problems before they become disasters.
That's a good bridge into my next question. And I want to maybe kind of make it two parts. One, a general question, kind of what improvements have you seen in the retail space over the past years that you think are positive and have been helpful? And then adding on to that, because Bill, we get this question a lot from our members or members who are talking to each other. If a retail company has a food safety manager, director, whatever expert on staff, where does that position report? often it reports to loss prevention. Is that right? Should it report to the C-suite? Should it report someplace else? So kind of a two-part question for you.
So let me answer that question first. You know, going back to your concern about the brand, I mean, for many retail outlets, restaurants, grocery stores, that's the biggest asset you have. And especially when you're selling food and you're trying to protect the asset, I have no idea why you wouldn't have the director of food safety like sitting right outside the president's office. To me, that seems complete commonsensical. Now, obviously, my perspective is one of food safety, but if all you're doing is, in a sense, selling food, and that's the thing you're doing, it strikes me that that might be, you know, the most important, you know, thing that you should do.
Great. And so going back to the retail space, what improvements have you seen, you know, over the past years that you think are achievements and that, you know, to the retailers and wholesalers that will be hearing from you in a few months should pay attention to?
Yeah, so I think technology, I think for many folks, and we're talking, you know, the big box stores and even less so, the ability to use technology to know what people purchased, to, you know, push a button, you know, in food safety and stop the ability to scan a product that's been recalled or you're concerned about. To me, that has been like an enormous benefit to the public and to retailers. And I think that's a really good thing. The reliance on audits, third-party audits, I think is kind of a mixed bag. I think on one hand, it's good that retailers are doing it. And I think that that's, for the most part, enhanced food safety. But on the other hand, the complete reliance on outside people to protect food safety and therefore protect your brand has, I think, sometimes come back and bit companies pretty hard. But, you know, I think there's always room, you know, for improvement. I think, you know, educating the public more about their role in food safety, you know, how to keep hot things hot and cold things cold when you're, you know, shopping. You know, don't go shopping, you know, at 8 o'clock in the morning and then spend your entire day driving around with stuff in your trunk and then go home and put it on your counter and wait for another day. You know, I mean, there are things that I think we could be more proactive about, but, you know, there have been lots of improvements, you know, in the retail space over the last 30 years. You know, and I think there's, you know, obviously more room for improvement, but I think the industry should be very proud of itself.
Right. Well, I have one final question for you. It has to do with recalls. We see a lot of recalls. And I mean, I look at my phone sometime and it looks like someone at FDA or USDA has clicked send and you get, you know, 15 different recalls, and quite often it's a labeling issue. You know, this peanut butter has peanuts in it or whatever, you know, type thing. Do you worry that consumers, you know, the best way to say it is become numb to recalls? Do you worry that we have so many recalls that, I mean, not saying they're not important, right? Because if you have allergies to different things, they're very important, but they're not necessarily, you know, some of the issues that we've had. What are your thoughts on that? How do we?
It's kind of a good question. And I think if you ask that question of you and me, I would say we get way too many recall notices. But I think the reality is people that do what I do or you do and people in our space, they pay attention to that stuff. But the rest of the public doesn't. You know, I mean, you know, there's an outbreak on a food item right now that's taken up a lot of space and a lot of time in the last 8 weeks. But, you know, there are people that didn't get the email that you should throw it away, or they didn't, you know, see it on the news that there's hundreds of people sick or there's multiple lawsuits. There's people still eating the product because it's a frozen product. So and I'm not sure you can necessarily say it's because that failure of getting that information out to somebody to protect them is a failure of not having the right way to do it, or is it complete overload by, maybe arguably unnecessary or at least too many recalls? That would be an interesting case study for some business school, but I don't know the answer to that really. I really don't.
Yeah. Well, Bill, I appreciate your time, and we're really excited to be able to speak to you, some more in front of our audience in October. We'll have our NJ Executive Conference and Public Policy Summit October 24th through the 26th here in Washington, D.C. at the JW Marriott. You'll be speaking on the morning, October 25th, 9:45 in the morning Eastern Time. Really excited. We appreciate our friends at Ecolab for bringing you and all the work that they do to help our industry be better serving their communities and ensuring that what we sell in our stores and our stores that we operate are safe places for Americans. So, Bill, thank you so much for your time, and we certainly look forward to talking to you again soon.
Great. Take care. Thank you so much.